What's up, everybody? Trophy 2025, 25 years of trophy.
By Martin. trees for this afternoon. It's a tradition that I introduce the demonstrators, but I think it's absolutely not necessary because you all know them. All you know all Ryan here? Stemberger.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for Bonsai brother. So today he prepared this wonderful tree for me. So maybe everybody knows before work on this, so we change the angle like this. This jade is the most important character of this tree. So when we lift up the right side, so this jade looks very nice. So from the bottom to top, pointing to the sky. So that's why. So
Margot, can you tell us a little bit about your plans today?
Hello everyone, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure, it's a great honor to be in the stage with other students. We are working on this Scots pine that I collected in France 7 years ago. The good story of this tree was that we found it on a slope, and you can see here the tree has two big chin. One was the original root that was running 5 meters on top of the hill. And this was another part of the trunk that was alive that I remove the moment we collect the tree to just keep the main interesting part here. And along these past few years, I had Andres Bicoca in my place, and he did some work on the deadwood. Question, I'm very happy to reply. Thank you.
Yeah, wow. So much energy. It's good to see you all. It's good to be back. It's been 5 years. And last time I was here was 2020. And a week after I went home, the whole world shut down. And we all remember that, or we've forgotten that. And it's okay to forget it. But, you know, life has taken a very circuitous route to get me back here 5 years later. So within a period of 18 months, my entire world collapsed after leaving Europe. And the last time I was at the trophy, my home was destroyed, my garden was destroyed. We had a heat event in Oregon where temperatures exceeded, I want to say, 50 degrees Celsius in our garden, which has never happened in the history of North America in a temperate region. And so, you know, suddenly I was without a house, I was without a garden, and I lost a significant big deal. Now, interestingly enough, on that trip, this tree was styled for the first time during a Bonsai Focus photo shoot. And maybe if we can pull the images up on the screen, we can look at how this tree began its journey. This tree in the Bonsai Focus studios, Martin from the Bonsai Plaza generously contributed the material for the photo shoot. And obviously, like a very impressive, well-grown piece of field-grown stock. And anytime that you have a piece of field-grown stock, there's different considerations than whether it's young or yes, but visual age in a tree. And the presence of deadwood is a major visual exhibition of age. And the live dead tissue interaction is where the visual quality of junipers really comes about. So let's, if we can go back to that image of this tree initially, and then sort of go through the process. So if we can just sort of go to image number 2, trying to find the best base, the best, and then starting to talk about the different pieces. So already we've taken the foliage off of the upper gin, which you see here. Use tools to split and tear the tissue to create grain, to create texture, to create scale and proportion. Let's go to the next image. So this is the process by which we strip all of this down. Let's go to the next image. And this is the process to create deadwood. Now, I do like to, although I have tremendous respect for people that use power carving tools and create really fantastic deadwood with power tools. If left to my own devices, I'm going to have done the deadwood work. Now, the crux of this piece of work here if the tree's gonna move to the left because we have this fantastic little trunk on the lower left of the tree, then we have to compress on the right. And you see that move here, the compression on the right. And go ahead and show me the next image. Okay, we start to do the structural work up on the apical region. Go ahead and go to the next image. And this is the splitting of this operation here, where we start to raise this. Now, when we split a piece of tissue, one thing I learned early on, I used to use a lot of mechanical tools to determine the thickness of the tissue, reduce the tissue, and have control, right? I felt apply compression. Next picture, please. And then we see the compression on the right side, where you start to see that full piece pulled in. So then let's keep moving. Next picture. And we reduce the left side, or excuse me, the right side to fully compress and commit to the asymmetry and the flow of the tree to the left, right? So let's go ahead and go through the next two images. 1 and then 2, please. And then take me to the last one. These are the bins of all the big structural pieces. Now we start the secondary, tertiary. So this is a very major aspect of working. This was as it finished in Bonsai Focus. I believe the studio shot was something like this, maybe a little bit more zoomed out. And then fast forward to where we are today, and this is the same tree, right? It almost, okay, yeah. Yeah, let me just talk about the work I'm gonna do today, and then I'm gonna hand it over to you guys. Okay, so then the request today. I've got a huge Sabina juniper tomorrow that you guys are gonna wanna come and see if you wanna see something crazy happen, right? Last time I was here, I believe I said, let's rock and roll. And I think we have all of this dead wood. We have all of this live-dead interaction, and what ends up happening in bonsai is we're trying to create age and asymmetry and show deadwood and show live-dead interaction, and then all of a sudden we create this big, healthy dome of foliage on everything, and it's like, well, but wait, I thought the tree had deadwood, I thought it was in rough condition, I thought things were tough for the tree, but this tree looks like a young tree on an old tree trunk, right? And so you say, okay, now I've gotten to this point and the tree is so healthy. Can I push it farther?
Already remove take these branches off because this branch is coming back to 4. So we still have these branches to make the first branch.
Of the front, creating this gin to highlight this transition. We have another beautiful gin here. There was an old gin that was kind of visually conflicting with this line. I love these two lines coming back towards the base of the tree. They could be a good visual linking point. I always like to check in the soil and see the mycorrhiza. That's also the signal that the root ball is strong and ready. I need both signal from the roots and from the foliage to tell me that is the right time to the first big stress. The first
from the raw tree to the first iteration was a day and a half in the Bonsai Focus studios, and then the tree was left to grow. It was in that terracotta pot. It was put into this bonsai container, I'm assuming by Martin, and now it's accumulated the kind of mass, it's like if you the left, how I start to create the kind of remnants of what was on that side, and I start to generate a little bit more movement to the left, and I start to think about this branch here, and I'm not necessarily saying that I don't need those, but I can shift this to the left, and I start to look down in here and I say, gosh, there's kind of a lot of unnecessary stuff in here. I've got good length over the top, so can I show a little bit more of that branch line right there and gain a little bit more? And I say, yeah, I can, let's do it. Let's go for it. Okay, now notice that I'm leaving behind all the pieces that I can potentially use. That's how I show the remnants of what used to be there. That's how I continue to kind of add to the story for each tree, right? And so my interest in bonsai is not making the same tree every single time, it's making a new tree every single time, letting the material guide the dance. And if you've followed anything that I do on the internet, you'll know I put the weight on the tree.
Doing another work. You can see I put the first thick wire here, and then Rudy now inside outside is wiring everything. That obviously goes consequentially from the thicker wire of trees. And I still remember I was in my room, I have this pile bonsai book and magazine, and I was looking at the picture, and then when I was at the local bonsai club, I said, why those trees are so different from the one I see on the magazines? And it took me years to really understand, and meeting different bonsai master to totally agree with Ryan when he said we have to find the perfect design for every tree. So our background and also our...
Out of the mountain. We just take it to the nursery, it's sifted in our sizes, so.
Yeah, I think decomposed granite or yeah. I don't think we have it here in a single fashion. Sure.
So that's why we are lucky.
As I didn't see that 10 years ago. So, very selfish question, but it probably behooves all of us to understand it a little bit more.
Coming, so I think he understood that as well, but maybe not everybody has heard it. Ryan has of course been on the search also in North America for looking at suitable...
So, you know, soils, we got into this water, oxygen discussion, nutrition. This is like, to style a good bonsai tree, you've got to know this stuff. Or at least you don't have to know it, but you've got to follow somebody who's like telling you the right thing in terms of what to do. And, you know, you don't have to know the why, but if you want to be really good at bonsai or you want to respond to things that demand your knowledge, then you do have to understand the why. So, first of all, you have to understand what is akadama. Right? Because if you just break it down, akadama is red soil, aka, red, soil, right? In terms of the kanji symbols, basically, okay? It's a little more complicated than that. And akadama exists across the island of Japan because it is a volcanic byproduct on the outskirts of a volcanic range where the actual impact did not vitrify the soil. Vitrifying meaning turning to stone. So pumice and lava are much closer to the volcanic activity. Akadama exists on the outskirts in a ring around the base of a volcano, okay? And it has a mineral content combined with a slight amount of heat to give it a tubular structure, okay? Akadama is a clay. Clay as a soil particle is a plate structure. So when it gets wet, it shrinks and it fractures. Or when it gets wet, it expands and it fractures, and it shrinks and it fractures, and it gets cold and it expands and it fractures, and it gets hot and it shrinks and it fractures. And that's what turns clay into something we can make a bonsai container out of, right? But when you start to talk about akadama for use inside of the containerized environment, that clay under the pressure of that volcanic activity with the right mineral content, the right distance from the epicenter of the eruption, becomes a tubular structure. And it's a three-dimensional helix of tubular structures that pass through this mineral content, 7 to 10% organic matter, the rest of it primarily inert aggregate matter. And the thing that makes akadama durable at that point is it can shrink and swell without passively breaking down into smaller and smaller particles. So you can't make a bonsai container out of good hard akadama because the tubular structure prevents you from getting a fine enough grain to mix it with water and make that, right? And so this tubular structure has another purpose, and that is the root system will actually penetrate that tubular structure. Now, another aspect of akadama is that it's very high in manganese, manganese, right? Now, if you look at manganese function inside of a plant, it is an essential microelement. You need very little manganese for a plant to survive and thrive. And in fact, manganese and iron should balance each other if you just want to go deeper. But manganese controls internode elongation. And that should be a major light bulb for you guys. Because when you put a tree, coming out of the mountains, I want this tree to grow roots, I'm gonna put it into pumice as a conifer, right? And some people say, well, why don't you put it directly into akadama? Because akadama automatically is gonna hold more water, right? But akadama is gonna cause the roots to be shorter and more stunted because of the manganese content in it. It's gonna cause the branches to become shorter and the foliage to become smaller. That's the manganese of akadama acting on the root system. When those roots start to grow through that tubular structure and access a greater and greater quantity of manganese. Now, as that root grows through there, it doesn't stop it from growing because it's just a small amount of manganese that's available to the plant, but it's enough that it shortens or reduces its growth rate slightly. The root will still thicken, and when the root thickens, it swells and it fractures that akadama particle. And when that akadama particle fractures, with the release of the manganese content of the center of that akadama particle that was not exposed to the surface, it releases more manganese, and it causes that singular root to branch and bifurcate. And now those smaller branchlets grow into the tubular structure of those two smaller Akadama particles, and they start to access that manganese, which causes bifurcation in the canopy and reduction of the internode length. And you get this process of scalability of Akadama, where the roots are scaling the Akadama, which is releasing the manganese that shortens the internodes and causes bifurcation in the canopy of your tree. But the tree has phototropism, it's photosynthesizing, it's wanting to grow towards the sun, it thinks it wants to be a big tree, and so we prune that, and we get this thing happening in the roots, and we repot and we prune the big, strong, heavy roots, and we get finer and finer roots, and we get finer and finer foliage, and they're mirroring each other because of that action of Akadama and the techniques we apply to the bonsai vehicle to manage strength in the tip, and balance energy in the canopy, and strengthen the roots and balance energy in the roots. But without that intermediary of Akadama holding nutrition, but also supplying this critical element in a slightly toxic range of availability, too much manganese without iron causes a tree to stop growing. So iron becomes important in this process of utilizing Akadama. But that system is what compacts and refines a tree, which is not what you want in a piece of Yamadori, but is certainly what you want in a piece of styled bonsai material, right? So now all of a sudden you recognize, oh, the plot thickens. This is quite a bit more complex than we ever imagined, but we are getting to the point through microscopy, mineral investigation and assessment of soil conditions, where we are seeing soils that offer potential, but nothing that replaces Akadama, which happens to be a unicorn in the world of horticulture, as it's been told to me, because there's no other soil particle that behaves the same. So no, we haven't found a replacement, but we've tried.
It's okay? I experiment. Okay. So that's a little teaser for you. Stay till the end, and then you get an answer to your question, how is it going to be in the pot, and how to deal with the deadwood, and what sort of pot does he envision for this tree?
Hitching a ride on sugars and starches down to the roots, which is where the exudate gets expelled, and then the auxin in the root tip is piggybacking on water up to the tip of the plant and accumulating where the greatest transpiration is taking place, which is what creates apical dominance.
Well, it's called apical meristem.
Apical meristem, but it's by the role of the water moving to the greatest amount of transpiration, which has the access to the sun plus is important to understand.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ryan said. We have work in our microclimate and understand the situation. My mistake when I start, buying National Bonsai Magazine translation that came from Japan, and I was looking at the picture and trying to understand what they did. And in Japan, seems everything grows in full Akadama, and I tried to do the same in my place. And after 5, 6, 10 years, that Akadama was rotting, and I started having so many big problems on my trees. And in the meantime, I started having good trees, so I had to really understand what was the good soil mix that I could use in my place. And kind of the same, in another way, I have this experience when I start going in the United States and working there. Whatever place I was touching on my tour, everyone seems was using 1-1-1 Akadama, lava, and pumice. And I was going through Florida, and then north in Boston, and then the other in Los Angeles. And it's the same tree cannot live in the same media in the different part of the world where you live, because everything is about your microclimate. Again, personally, now every tree from my collection is in the same place, emphatically. But before I have this collection, this part of my collection, 1 hour away in Marostica, where Matteo lives, and we have the club there. And only 1 hour distance, driving distance from the two places, the growing condition of the tree were totally different. So it's very important, absolutely, to rely on some good information, but then you have to do and try to find your own magic formula how to grow your trees. Because you can listen, a lot of good information coming from Bonsai Mirai, coming from my YouTube channel, but this is our personal experience.
that can be only the base for your own experience. And then you have to find a way that works for you. That doesn't exist a magic formula that is all over the world used that make a beautiful bonsai. If you look at the show and you grow on the top, bonsai mountain in Europe, you're gonna find a lot of small differences because we live in a lot of different places. This is something very important to know, because if we listen whatever is our experience like a Bible, and then we try to apply 100% that in your place, you're gonna fail. That can be only the base for the understanding of what the best for your trees, according to the species and according to your location. This is my personal point of view.
Goes back to the discussion that we had about the soil particle, right? One particle of Akadama, when it splits into two, doesn't double the surface area for nutrition and water to be held. It actually exponentially increases the surface area. Well, when you go from a coarse needle like this that has very, very long needles on it, right? Which is generally how a juniper that's very vigorous and growing very rapidly has a lot of this, or is very young and not yet scaled in terms of the Akadama. Okay, and you start to transition to this, which is much more compact, which has exponentially greater surface area. I can actually take off far more foliage from this tree now at this stage of development than I could initially when I did that first styling. Because the foliage that I'm leaving behind has an exponentially greater capacity to produce sugars and starches based on that exponentially greater surface area of that smaller and smaller needle size, right? So it seems weird that a smaller needle gives me more sugar and starch, but it's in actuality very true that the finer the growth gets, the more energy the system has. Okay, now it makes sense because as the roots expand and scale on the Akadama here, and we see that happening here, and as we manage strength here, we see that impacting the bifurcation of the roots here, we start to recognize that the more and more refined, the more ramified, the more woody tissue we have on the plant, the more ramified, the more needles we have on the plant, we actually need to be feeding refined trees far more. But then there's that pesky nitrogen resource that can destroy the refinement process of pre-made bonsai fertilizers, which I'm not discouraging you from that because it's very convenient, but convenience doesn't always equal the highest quality product. We'll tuck that conversation over here and just say, I actually haven't removed a tremendous amount of foliar mass on this tree for what it has the capacity to generate based on the scalability of the foliar mass from moving from the grow pot into an actual bonsai container. And so horticulturally, I'm actually far above where I was in that initial design with the reduction that I'm performing today, right? Now, this does bring about a question of, is this the ideal time to do this kind of reduction? And when we look at the energy system of the tree, we would say, listen, fall is when a tree produces vascular growth. The trunk swells, the branch swells, the roots grow in the most abundant amount, right? And we see that in a tree ring, the largest thickening of a tree ring. Every tree ring has two parts, the spring growth and the fall growth of a single ring. The spring growth is very minimal. The fall growth is very maximal, right? So that vascular productivity in the fall, when we generate that tissue has to become cold tolerant. So the tree stocks all the cells in that tissue with sugars and starches and pigments that it pulls out of the foliage, which is why this looks a little less green than it would in the growing season, because it's pulled that sensitive green chlorophyll out and stored it in the cells to decrease their ability to freeze, improve their cold tolerance, right? So when we come back and we remove all the growing tips in the spring, guess what's gonna happen to this tree? It's got all the stored sugars and starches throughout the tissue, and I'm reducing the number of tips that those stored sugars and starches are gonna be allocated towards. So naturally, those tips that accumulated on all of that foliar mass but are now being delivered to this many growing tips, the tips are going to be reinvigorated again, right? So when you're working on a tree in refinement, your better approach is to handle that tree in the fall prior to the onset of vascular tissue so that it only builds the vascular tissue and stores the resources that feed the number of tips you want for that tree to stay in refinement, right? So this, if I were worried about this tree being showable, staying in refinement, not destroying the compactness of the foliage, it's a Kishu juniper, I'm not worried about that. But if I were on a pine that has the ability to generate long needles, or a juniper that's slightly coarser in its phenotype or its species, then I would save this work for the early fall. And now we start to understand the energy system of the tree, the seasonality, and the stage of development to elicit the response that you want from your tree, and it has nothing to do with fertilizer, right? Cool stuff. It only has two places to allocate toxicity. It can either push toxicity to the tip of the foliar mass, or it can push toxicity to the tip of the root. These are the only two places that a plant can detox itself. So when you see an expression of disease, right, that is the tree pushing toxicity to that branch that experiences the disease first. And depending on how you choose to look at this, you could say that the disease is actually doing the plant a favor by consuming the foliar mass that the plant has pumped all the toxicity into and said, here, have it, right? You voracious coyotes, eat that dead meat, and I'm gonna keep my other branches healthy, okay? You could think about it like that. Now all of us look at that branch and we say, that's my favorite branch, and now it's dying of disease, so I'm gonna spray it with chemicals. Oftentimes the chemicals, particularly fungicides, are filled with the exact same toxicity as being pumped into that branch. And it actually exacerbates the issue. It may stop the growth of that fungus because the toxicity, which is ultimately metals, kills that fungus. But then that toxicity is absorbed by that tree, and now it has more metals than it had before you sprayed that fungus that only died because of the metals, but the tree had metals, which is what caused the fungus. And so we see fungal issues being this perpetual state of existence until conditions in the environment are not favorable. And you say, but I sprayed with fungus and next year the tree didn't have it. Okay, because the tree is constantly trying to balance that toxicity. So it's taking that toxicity plus the toxicity you add from chemicals, and it's distributing them throughout the tree, and maybe it's able to achieve a balance. Where you say, my tree's healthy, I sprayed fungicide or insecticide, all is good, that's how I treat that problem. That mindset is what has led us down the road of heavy chemical use, but we should recognize that chemical use, the presence of fungus, the presence of insects, are the tree telling us, I've got something wrong here. Can you stop doing as much of what you're doing, or can you fix what's happening that's not good for me, in addition to saving that branch, stopping that insect, suppressing that fungal issue through that chemical treatment. But if we just say, I'm just gonna keep loading it with fertilizer, and I'm gonna spray with fungicide and insecticide, even though those problems are getting worse, you're actually making the tree more and more susceptible. And all of a sudden we say, well, can I just look at my tree and say that it's healthy? Absolutely, and you should. And also when you have problems, you now know that what you're doing is causing an imbalance that's leading to a lack of health, so your behavior needs to change. Whatever that change is, that's now the conundrum in bonsai, because without the ability to test and to know and to, right, all the stuff that I'm doing, it's tough. But shifting your fertilizer, right? I'm using BioGold, and BioGold has a high ammoniacal nitrogen content. Ammoniacal nitrogen bypasses the biological barrier. So I'm gonna shift to a lower nitrogen quantity fertilizer, or I'm gonna change the form of nitrogen in my fertilizer. That would be a good shift when the tree shows you an imbalance and leads to that visible communication. But I think we're just starting to learn that the tree having problems is the tree talking to us about what's going on. How we fix it, that's now the evolving conversation in bonsai.
Ryan, we really...
The zone Maro's talking about specific zones and specific climates in your garden, and especially in the Mediterranean region.
I think I explained. So this is this gene is the most important character of this gene. So that's why I want to change the angle like this. So we focus on this gene. So when I work on the trees, I always compact the trees as much as I can. So I also satisfied with this tree. So now we are talking about the pot.
What's wrong with this? Too big, too wide?
This one is too big, just only too big. So,
So, oh, this is also good, I think. Oh yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cutters are seen as a little bit of like a boutique item in your toolkit. In my mind, it takes out the necessity for a knob cutter and a concave cutter. So you get the best of both worlds in a singular tool. And still, it's one of the harder tools to find, a spherical concave cutter, but now you have something to quest for in your journeys across the bonsai unknown. And then a good pair of wire cutters and a good pair of pliers. I will say this. Plier work and the use of pliers to execute design was just a fundamental of my apprenticeship. If you could not use pliers, then you couldn't assist in any of the big work that was taking place in the workshop, because so much of it involved tightening guy wires. And you've seen up here, as I've been working on heavy wire, my pliers come out to preform a hook to anchor it. My pliers come out to help me with guy wires that are moving the big structural pieces. You have to be able to use your pliers proficiently in a singular hand, so you can apply force in one hand, and then you use your pliers to take up that slack. In repotting, you're pushing down on an anchor point, you're pulling up on an anchor point, and then you're tightening that anchor point. So plier work, you can have the best tools in the world, and if you can't use them, it really doesn't matter, right? But I don't see a lot of people in bonsai have the capacity to use pliers effectively. And so when you're talking about, okay, so how do you get to the point of being able to use pliers? Just a simple exercise of, as you're standing around, using that dexterity drill in both directions, right? And then if you start flipping it up, how do you keep it? Because most of the time it's gonna fall down like this, so how do you keep it up, right? And then go the opposite way. So anytime we were standing as an apprentice, we were always doing this, because the moment that you needed something to happen, you were gonna be on it, your pliers were in your hand and you had already rehearsed. But then you start to move to the left side and you start to become ambidextrous, because then you have the control of the push on your right hand, right? So creating that kind of, if you were in sports, you're going to dribble a soccer ball or a football, and you're going to shoot it at the goal a bunch, or you're going to work on your basketball handling skills or lacrosse, whatever you're going to do, right? You're going to practice that technique. Not many people think about practicing techniques in bonsai. We just walk up to the tree and we start doing work on the tree, but the tree would appreciate you practicing your techniques. I guarantee it. So there's a few little dexterity drills for you guys if you want to get better at what I think is one of the underserved techniques in bonsai, which is the use of pliers.
And that's why they bend and they twist. That's why the trunk is so twisted, because he has to hold the weight of all the branches. And we're getting slowly to the final shape. Hopefully it will be nice. As the ones from Spain or France, they still tend to be thin, but with a good cultivation you can reduce them. That's only because, for example, Caledonia pine and pines from the north, they are used to a very high amount of moisture. They grow in moss, the roots grow in
I really do try to have a motivation and an understanding of where the tree's at and what needs to happen, and it helps to explain it to people that are asking about it and watching. Anyways, the goal over the course of time is to have less wire on the tree, which I think if and I will challenge all of you to do this, if you walk through the exhibition with an intelligent eye, a big part of the exhibition and seeing the trees at the highest level is not seeing the tree that looks the nicest, it's seeing the tree that looks the nicest with the least amount of human input. Wired more significantly each time, because if you're wiring 15 to 20% that you get to do, right? So the biggest thing that I was encouraged to do as an apprentice from the very beginning, before I could ever wire, because I went to Japan not being able to wire at all. I had no clue how to wire. I'd studied books and tried my best and done a very poor job. And the biggest thing that I was encouraged to do was to wire faster from day one. And I was even I can't even wire, and you want me to wire faster? This is a real problem. And Mr. Kimura never stopped telling me to wire faster. Even in my 6th year, was still telling me to wire faster. So, but it certainly has enhanced the joy, because when you can get through work, then you can do more work, and doing more work is what it's all about.
expect to be the natural prosecution of the trunk line around this gene and up, even if we kind of trick the eyes of the observer with another extra branch that we bring from another junction. But for today's all, see you at the next. Big applause to us.
Situation in self-defense, or in Bonsai, we're trying to create a series of
to a condition or a circumstance that you haven't approached or seen before that demands a little bit
of subconscious skills, so when we get into situations we can act without thinking on to situations that are less predictable. Does that make sense?
those menial things, you tend to lose your way a little bit, or at least I've found I lose my way a little bit. So it's not so much needing a janitor, it's needing really high-level trees brought to their artistic peak by skilled hands. And that takes a long time to cultivate, and that length of time leads a lot.
If I reduce the overly long pieces, if I take away the weaker stuff because I have stronger stuff to replace it, all of these pieces that don't have a position in the tree. Now this is definitely a luxury of a second working here. Would I approach a raw styling the same way? Absolutely. Does it mitigate?